Good evening and welcome to another episode of Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening via Skype by two people. Firstly, Elaine White from the Clyde Fishermen's Association on this side of me, and also by Deirdre Brock on the other side, who's the MP for North Edinburgh and Leith. How are you both tonight?
Good, thank you. Thanks, Kenny. Nice to be here with you.
Excellent. Well, our first news obviously is on coronavirus, and as of 2 p.m. today in Scotland there had been a total of 10,676 tests concluded. Of these, 9,957 tests were confirmed negative and 719 tests were positive. This marks an increase of 135 confirmed cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection has sadly risen to 22. At present, figures for the UK as a whole have not been published today. Thousands of 15-minute home tests for coronavirus will be delivered by Amazon to people self-isolating with symptoms, or will go on sale on the high street within days, according to Public Health England, in a move that could restore many people's lives to a semblance of pre-lockdown normality. Professor Sharon Peacock, the Director of the National Infection Service at Public Health England, told MPs on the Science and Technology Committee that mass testing in the UK would be possible by next week. The UK government has bought 3.5 million tests, which the Health Secretary Matt Hancock mentioned yesterday with no suggestion that they would be available to the public so quickly, and is ordering millions more. The test, which looks like a pregnancy test and involves pricking the finger to produce a drop of blood, which is then analysed by the device, will first be validated in Oxford to ensure it works as well as scientists hope. That will happen this week, Peacock said, and it will then be available to test healthcare workers and the general public. Several million tests have been purchased for use. These are brand new products. We have to be clear they work as they are claimed to do, she said. Once they have been tested this week and the bulk of tests arrive, they will be distributed into the community. Amazon has agreed to carry out distribution, and the tests will also go on sale in chemist shops. Asked if they would be available in days rather than weeks or months, Peacock said, yes, absolutely. If there was a charge for them, she thought it would be minimal, she said. And Deirdre, this is great news if we can start getting more tests done, isn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, that's what the World Health Organization has been pushing for weeks now. Test. I think the lead for that was saying. So yeah, I mean, it is good news. There's certain numbers of ifs in there. I mean, 3.5 million, of course, is a huge amount, but how quickly can they get the remaining millions? I did hear some of the press conference that the Prime Minister had today with his experts, and that did seem to suggest there is a global shortage of tests. So, you know, whether all of these can come together as quickly as we would all like, we'll very much hope that is the case. I think it's interesting Amazon is helping out with distribution. That certainly hopefully suggests that we can get these out to people as quickly as possible. But I think the crucial thing at this time, and this is what has been called for a long time now, is just NHS workers, those people on the front line getting tested, getting those tests out to those folk as quickly as possible. I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, and Elaine, what are what's your thoughts on this? Is this something you're welcoming as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think everyone would welcome this. I think it's something that they've done in other European countries, and it certainly helped. Particularly, I know with our fishing guys, and I guess with anybody who works in close proximity within factories, fishing boats, etc., it's going to be helpful to have that test and know who might be carrying.
Yeah, on that note, for the fishermen, as you say, they're working in very close proximity. I mean, these boats barely allow you to get 2 meters away from everybody. How concerned are some of the fishermen about that?
I mean, most of our fleet have actually tied up at the moment or are just about to. So there won't really be many of our boats out soon. But I know it might be a concern for some of the boats in the northeast who might still be fishing. But yes, they were very concerned about it, and I think a lot of responsible skippers had already tied up quite early in the week. Certainly it was a concern for people processing fish as well in factories. So yeah, I think it's something we're all thinking about regardless of sector.
Mm-hmm. And Deirdre, there's been a lot of criticism about this from various people that the government hasn't done more testing. Why do you think that's been, and what is there some reason do you think that the government chose not to pursue the testing strategy that WHO recommended?
Are you talking about the Scottish Government or the UK Government?
Well, both, really.
Well, I mean, obviously, the Scottish Government takes advice from its experts, and if that's what the experts are recommending at the time, then, they will be going along with that. But, you've heard, as I said, there seems to be a global shortage of tests available. There are still some doubts about their effectiveness. So, as we heard, you quoted was it the Chief Medical Officer for
Sharon Peacock,
England?
yeah, the professor, yeah.
Yeah. So, there are a whole variety of issues as to the sort of just the production of these and the supply of them. But clearly, I think certainly from the Scottish Government's point of view, it seems to me, listening to Jason Leach and Catherine Calderwood, that this is something that they've been pursuing for some days now and are very keen to ramp up as quickly as possible.
Yeah, either way, I'm sure it's got to be good news. Speaking of Scotland, though, a new expert group providing additional scientific analysis of the impact of COVID-19 in Scotland has been announced by the First Minister. As the number of cases increases, it's important that we have the fullest understanding of exactly how COVID-19 is spreading in Scotland. Professor Andrew Morris, Professor of Medicine at the University of Edinburgh and Director of Health Data Research UK, will chair the Scottish Government's COVID-19 Advisory Group. He'll be supported by Vice Chair Professor David Crossman, Dean of Medicine at the University of St Andrews and Chief Scientific Advisor for Health in the Scottish Government. The group will supplement the advice coming to the four nations from the Scientific Advisory Group on Emergencies to further strengthen Scottish Government modelling work informing national and local decisions in Scotland during the pandemic. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Catherine Calderwood said, "We are facing an unprecedented situation and it's crucial we not only follow the latest scientific advice coming from SAGE, but establish what that means here in Scotland on a local level. It's vital that we are well equipped to deal with all possibilities as this outbreak grows globally, and this advisory group will play a key role in developing our understanding of the virus and its impact on Scotland. We will continue to work closely with the UK Government, Welsh Government and the Northern Ireland Executive as part of a coordinated response to this virus." And Deirdre, as you say, there are different scientific advisors for Scotland, different chief medical officers. What difference do you think this will make to have a specifically Scottish angle on the research?
Well, I mean, I think it's very much to be welcomed, this new group. I think you've got some serious clout on there, scientific clout. The names you mentioned, Andrew Morris, of course, from the University of Edinburgh, but others as well. And I think the fact that this gives some handle on what is happening on the ground locally up in Scotland is really important. I mean, we've been very impressed with Catherine Calderwood, of course, and Jason Leach, amongst others. But to have additional folk, hands at the helm, I think is really important. And I think, because, how could you say that the conditions and the needs of people on the ground in London is the same as those up in the Highlands or in some of our islands? They're clearly very different perspectives, and so people who have a better understanding of that, being involved in a group like this, I think is really important.
Yeah, and Scotland's actually got a slightly lower infection rate, growing slightly more slowly than England, and especially, as you say, London, which is really struggling just now.
Yes.
Do you think that's due to policy differences, or do you think it's just luck that we're a bit more spread out and so there's a bit less contact possible?
Well, you could argue, I might say this anyway, but I have been so impressed by Nicola and the government's handling of this in so many ways, but and those two health officers in Catherine Calderwood and Jason Leach, who are, the sort of front face of the NHS and public health for us and here in Scotland. Their messaging has been as far as it can be. They have to operate on the advice that they're given as well. But I think their advice has been so clear cut and it's been very firm. And I feel in some ways, perhaps that there was some of the messaging coming out of Westminster and through the Prime Minister was not as clear cut. And I think, I hope that that is not what is necessarily lying behind the difference, as you say, in the rates of infection. But I feel that it has been handled very well, as far as anyone can handle these things. It's such a difficult period, by the First Minister and our officers. And they continue to impress me every time I see them. But, let's hope London, there's this argument at the moment between Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, and I think it's Matt Hancock made a point at the press conference yesterday about, the tube and who is responsible for workers continuing to be in close contact on the tube and getting, the fact that they need to get to work and there's not enough support for them yet. And I mean, this sort of political wrangle, I think, is really unfortunate at this time. I think it plays very, very badly with the public. Everyone should be getting together and working out a solution to these sorts of things. But yeah, London is, it's not in a good way, and we'll just have to hope that the latest restrictions in movement and so on really start to have some effect. But it will be some time before we actually start to see that in the figures. Unfortunately, I think what we're going to see is an increase in certainly the coming few days before that can hopefully start to level off.
Yeah, okay. Well, moving on, and a story more for Elaine to talk about. The seafood sector is to receive an initial package of more than £5 million in financial support to assist businesses during the coronavirus outbreak. Funding will be offered to over 650 seafood fishing companies, many of whom have lost their livelihoods with the collapse of export and hospitality markets for Scottish delicacies like langoustine, prawns and crab. An initial payment of 50% of 2 months' average earnings will be made to owners of all full-time Scottish registered fishing vessels of 12 metres or under, the vast majority of which are in the creel and dive sectors, many of whom operate in remote and island communities. Support is also being developed for the onshore processing industry, one of the largest employers in Scotland's coastal communities, and others in the shellfish growing sector, which is being affected by the loss of trade and markets. Fisheries Secretary Fergus Ewing said the economic impact of COVID-19 is global and is reaching into the heart of our fragile coastal communities. I've spent the last week listening to and liaising with our fishing industry, and there are many who have lost their livelihoods with little prospect of an early recovery. The need for action is immediate. I am therefore announcing an initial package of support, and Scottish Government officials are working as hard as possible to get this money out of the door as fast as we can. We recognise that more needs to be done, particularly to try and create some alternative markets, at least in the short term. I will be discussing with retailers how that might be achieved, and I would also encourage the public to play their part by buying Scottish seafood if they can. By working together, we can all play a part in securing the immediate future of some of the key contributors to Scotland's food and drink success. And Elaine, as you said, several of your members have already tied up. What do you think of this new announcement from Fergus Ewing today?
Well, I think it's to be commended. I think they've worked at extreme pace trying to get this out to everybody. We can't do anything but thank them for that. Civil servants and politicians have listened. I think it's important to note that there'll be a lot of boats that will be over 12. They might have 1 metre, they might be 13-metre boats, they might be 17-metre boats that have lost their markets just the same. But I see that there's flexibility in that scheme to consider those boats who have lost all of their markets as well. So I think it's been done in an incredibly short time scale, and we just can't thank them enough for that. It's true about the processing facilities, and actually some of those processors have had problems since probably December, because if they did have suppliers out in the Far East, they were supplying to the Far East. They were probably one of the first ones to notice that companies in China were closing, who they were working with. So it's been a precarious position for a lot of fishermen, particularly shell fishermen, for some time. We've seen it coming, but we appreciate everything that the government has done to try and help, and we will continue to support them in that.
Yeah, and do you feel like this has been quick enough? As you say, there's been this awareness that there was a problem coming since December. Do you feel like the government was well enough prepared and has reacted quickly enough?
I think, in fairness, nobody could have been prepared for what's happening. So I don't think it's fair to suggest that anybody wouldn't have been prepared for this to an adequate scale. I think that the reports from China were coming through, and certainly politicians were listening to that. But I think that the scale in which it hit Italy, and obviously Spain now as well, and France, that's their main markets. So I think they couldn't have responded any quicker than they have, really. I mean, we haven't got massive teams and civil servants in Marine Scotland, certainly. And they've responded as quickly as they possibly could. I guess the only thing that I'm hoping is that the scheme is able to help all of those who need it. Like I said, I don't think a metre or two in a boat should make a difference, but I'm sure that they'll do all they can to flexibly make sure everyone's supported.
Mm-hmm. And as you said, places like Spain are big markets for this, for Scottish fish. How big of an impact has that been, and how quickly did that affect the Scottish producers?
Very quickly. I mean, like I said, China had the first impact on us, and we witnessed that in December. One of our processors lost 10 companies out of the 12 that he supplied to with coronavirus. So like we understood it was coming. We didn't understand it would come at the rate at which it has. We have to be very honest about that. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Yep.
We didn't realise it was coming at the rate at which I had. Italy, we were getting phone calls maybe about 4 weeks ago, with people starting to panic, starting to see a change, and obviously the market started to lock down slowly. Our processors responded by cutting down the days at sea, etc. But, I think, of course, it's a massive impact in how we help to develop those companies through. Very fragile companies anyway, to be honest, in coastal communities, and they're very often one of the few employers. Yeah.
And Deirdre, you are fisheries spokesperson at Westminster. What's your feeling about this response from the Scottish government?
It's probably just important to add that, I very much welcome this money. It's an initial tranche. I know the Scottish government's looking at further ways that they can support the sector. And I know that Fergus Ewing, our minister in this area, is certainly looking hard at where alternative markets can be found for this fantastic produce. So he's talking to retailers, trying to see what can be done there. It's also probably worth noting too that there is a certain degree of flexibility. So those who aren't immediate or don't appear to be immediately eligible when you look at the criteria, can still put their details through to Marine Scotland if they feel that they're in need of urgent help, and the indication is that there will be support offered there. But this is you there, Elaine? Right. Okay. This support's absolutely vital. I don't think it's all that's coming. There will be more as we go forward. But there are knockdowns all along the line. We really have to pay tribute to all the folk working in this industry, because we've got folk who work in food production, as Elaine said, all down the food chain, if I can use that expression. They're going out doing their jobs while the rest of us are in our homes, and then the people in the fishing industry have the added dangers of that. And so I really think we owe them a big debt of gratitude for that.
Yeah. Now, the last time we had Elaine on, we were talking a lot about Brexit and the effect that's going to have on the fishing industry. That's all gone. Brexit discussions have all gone very quiet.
Haven't they?
How big of an impact do you think this is going to have, kind of on top of the Brexit concerns? These are two huge crises, kind of piled on top of each other. How much worse are things going to get, do you think?
Well, look, just speaking about one single issue, I cannot see how the UK government cannot ask for an extension to the transition period. I just cannot see how that will happen. I mean, they're keeping very quiet about it. They're not enjoying answering questions, because there has been the odd question in the House of Commons about this from time to time. Obviously, everyone's attention is very much focused with the crises right in front of us at the moment. But I think it's very much it kind of beggars belief, actually, that they are still clinging to this notion that they will still be departing Europe at the end of the year. It doesn't add up. So, perhaps during this recess period, the Parliament just went into recess this afternoon. The aim is to return on the 21st of April, Tuesday the 21st of April, I think it is, as we would have done normally with the Easter recess. So, these are all questions to be ironed out. Perhaps they'd be making an announcement about that in the recess period. I don't know. But it seems to me that, it can't go on much longer with this pretense.
Yeah. And Elaine, on that note, what have you heard on this subject? Because obviously the Brexit negotiations the trade deal negotiations have kind of broken down while Europe and the UK deal with this crisis. Have you heard anything that gives you any hope that there is going to be movement on all your concerns on the Brexit issues?
Well, to be honest, somebody texted me the other day and they said, "Can you remember when all we had to worry about was, red diesel and Brexit and all these things?" I think everything that's happening right now has superseded those key issues, to be honest, and I think that's right and good, because I think we have to look at these issues right now. I think looking at the crisis we're looking at, we'll be lucky if we really, really hope that we've got the fleet that we have at the moment to consider what's going to happen when we get to Brexit, if we get to Brexit in the timescale we expected or we thought. I do think what it has highlighted was when a market breaks down. If we lose a market like Italy, France, Spain, how devastating that can be fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So I think if it's taught us anything, it's taught us that we weren't exaggerating when we said that the communities could be very quickly at risk if it came to things like direct action and whatnot. So, I think if that's a lesson we can learn, that's one of them. Mm-hmm. But I think right now we're just really focusing on ensuring we get people through this blip, this massive concern.
Yeah, and it's not just the actual boats. I mean, there are processing companies that are already really struggling, and some kind of shutting their doors. What's the outlook for them at the moment?
Well, I mean, like I said, the government are doing all they can. Fergus has been very good at ensuring that he has roundtables with key members of the sector. They're listening and they're doing what they can within their capacities. So I'm assured of that. I'm sure they'll try and do the best things they can for all of those companies. But yeah, I mean, this was one of our concerns way back about what would happen to the supply chain. If it has done something, it might say that we have to look at what we do with our domestic marketing as well. We're trying to do things, but obviously most of our boats will be tied up in line with the government's advice at the moment. So it will be difficult to supply a local market. But I think, if we can help, I think that's what we're looking at. We're looking at ideas about how we can potentially help as well.
Mm-hmm. And what thoughts do you have then on how we can make the industry more resilient, more able to cope with these crises, and more able to pursue a future outside of the EU, and perhaps where we have to think about different types of catch and whatnot for environmental reasons? Is there a plan that you've got up your sleeve yet, or are you still developing that?
Well, as I said, I don't think anyone could have planned, not only in the fishing sector, but for everybody's life, for what's happened at the moment. So I don't think there's any degree of resilience we could have built into a global pandemic. But the Scottish Government had been running the Future of Fisheries Management Scheme, or consultation, which we had fed into. We were hoping to see the results of that in the next few months, and it's certainly had ideas about how local coastal fleets might be able to have access to different types of quota, how it can be fairly shared, different schemes that we'd have about training young people. Those types of ideas we've certainly passed on, and certainly we've passed on ideas about domestic markets. I mean, we do a lot of small things, like the festival in Glasgow. We do these things to try and develop people's knowledge and awareness and develop markets. But yeah, I guess a lot of that work would be on pause at the moment until we get through this.
And Deirdre, what can the government either at Westminster or at Holyrood do to help the processing companies? I mean, this is going to help the boats. This announcement from Fergus Ewing today. But what can the government do to help with the processing companies and other people in that supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I know Fergus's thoughts are very much with them as well. And as I said, he's speaking to retailers and trying to unlock potential markets through that, local retailers, that is. I mean, it is very, very difficult. You've got exports becoming more difficult. You've got closure of restaurants at home. We've got restricted openings of chip shops and other similar businesses, and so you're looking in a real reduction in outlets for the fish right across the board. And I mean, I know some are trying really hard. Welch's fishmongers in my constituency, for example, have started doing a home delivery service. So the support for the industry really is absolutely vital. I mean, as I said, there's knock-on all down the line. I'm hearing of smokehouses that are struggling to get fish in order to produce their goods. Producers of fish products will be struggling. It is a very, very difficult time. But I am confident. I mean, as Elaine has said, I know the government and officials are working as hard as they possibly can to get as much support out to the industry as quickly as they possibly can. But, they'll be trying to assess all the permutations, all the sort of knock-on implications for every aspect of the sectors that are involved in all this.
Yeah, and this kind of crisis shows up the fragility of a lot of our industries. The food system so far is holding up fairly well, but we're hearing a lot of farmers, for example, talking about how difficult it's going to be to get people out in the fields to pick crops once we get towards the summer. Is there anything happening in Westminster or anything you've heard about happening in Holyrood to try and kind of come out of this and build back a better, more resilient system generally?
In terms of just what's in time sort of deliveries and so on? I mean, certainly
every aspect of it, really.
We are considering. We must be looking at this and thinking this does not serve us whenever. I mean, this is a completely, this is such an enormous crisis that, although there were warnings about this for some years beforehand about the possibility of this sort of epidemic affecting us to this extent, you could argue that plans should have been put in place before now, and looking at that just-in-time system that operates through food production and delivery throughout the UK, the dependence on, I think it's 90% of our food is controlled by about 8 companies or 9 companies. That there's far too much concentration in too small a number of companies, and that should be sort of decentralized, if you like, and that would help remove some of the difficulties that we are facing currently. But in terms of food and agriculture, food and drink is part of our critical national infrastructure. So, of course, we want fruit and vegetables to be picked, collected. Obviously, the safety of the workers must be paramount at all times. So this is something that the government has to take into consideration constantly. But clearly with agriculture, for example, we already were suffering from a shortage of EU workers, seasonal agricultural workers. That's been happening for a couple of years now. So this sort of exacerbates the problem enormously. But at the same time, as James Porter of the Soft Fruit Growers Association in Angus has pointed out and has highlighted, because he's trying to recruit workers to help them pick their fruits in the sort of upcoming season. You have a number of people who were working in the hospitality sector, Europeans and others from elsewhere, who are now not working and who might be glad of that work. But as I say, at all times, really the spread of the virus and the health and safety of the workers has to be paramount in any of those considerations, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we will move on now. And at Westminster, the SNP has challenged the UK government on the unacceptable delays in providing a financial package of support for self-employed people. Speaking at Prime Minister's questions, Ian Blackford MP questioned why a package of support had not yet been put in place before the coronavirus lockdown was announced, given that other countries across the EU have delivered support for the self-employed. The SNP Westminster leader has repeatedly pressed the Prime Minister for support for the self-employed over the past month, calling on the UK government to introduce a package of measures including using the tax and welfare system to provide a guaranteed income for everyone, increasing UK statutory sick pay to the EU national average, including self-employed people in the coronavirus job retention scheme, and strengthening welfare protections by increasing child benefit and making universal credit more flexible. The Resolution Foundation estimates that 1 in 3 people in self-employment, a total of 1.7 million people, are at risk of losing their income, including around 330,000 in Scotland. SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford said the UK government has had weeks to ensure a financial package of support for self-employed people. The continued delays are unacceptable. People are losing their incomes. Telling them to wait another day simply isn't good enough. There are many measures that could have been introduced before we went into lockdown. Millions of self-employed people are worried about how they will support their families, pay their bills and keep a roof over their heads. They need financial support now. And Deirdre, this has been one of the main focuses of the SNP at Westminster over the last few weeks is calls for things like a basic income. What's your feeling about this, and how do you think the UK government is responding?
Well, yep, absolutely. I mean, I absolutely agree with everything that you've said, that you've mentioned, that Ian has said. I mean, desperate times call for desperate measures, and in my view, particularly around the issue of the self-employed, the UK government is not acting quickly enough. We have people, I mean, I have got so many constituents getting in touch with me who are desperately worried about their situation. Many of them are self-employed. I mean, even over the 80% payment suggested for those who are receiving wages through the PAYE system. I mean, I'm hearing now, there may be delays to that. I'm hoping that's not the case. Again, we will be pressing the government as far as we can to introduce that as quickly as possible. But, it just seems to me that with the UK government, you saw huge companies getting quick responses, small companies, the sort of SMEs and so on are only really now getting the support that they need. It's been a long time coming, and the self-employed are still waiting to hear what they're going to be getting. And most of them will be directed towards the benefit system, and that is just completely insufficient. The economy turns on the small-scale industries like those that the self-employed provide. So it's the person who cuts your hair or cleans your windows. You could argue that they are just as important, perhaps even more important than the big companies, because you've got local cafes buying locally, small restaurants buying from local suppliers. Those are jobs supporting other jobs rather than big companies' profit margins. So, at this time, I think it's absolutely vital that as far as we can, we support our local businesses. But, I just think, again, I don't think this government's really thinking about the fact that workers need wages in order to buy the things that big companies make. And so, you cannot ignore such a huge an important part of the economy as those who are self-employed workers.
Yeah.
I just feel like there's this sort of constant promise that, yes, we're trying to do something about this, we're trying to do something about this. And as I said, I didn't catch all of the press conference today. Maybe there were measures announced in that. I was sort of trying to keep an ear open as I was doing a variety of other things. But it just seems to me that they needed to act quicker, fast, and much more impressively in the way that we have seen. We have seen other countries leading the way on this. Denmark, for example, Norway. And it's not as if the examples aren't there to be had. The government could have been choosing to look in those directions and taking some, and actually acting similarly. But, well, we will continue to press them. We will continue to press them. I know the Scottish Government's been trying to get answers around the self-employed for a long time now, so we will keep going. And they do say that they will produce something for the self-employed. So we'll hope that it's at the very least as good as those who are in PAYE situations, furloughed workers are getting that 80% figure. That would be. But it's vital. It is vital.
Yeah. And Elaine, what are you hearing from your members on this kind of thing? Are they getting any help from these schemes that the government's announced?
Yeah, I mean, it's very worrying because I understand that most Christians are actually self-employed. The situation where they're being trying to go for universal credit, where there's currently, they said 5 weeks waiting list, we're hearing up to 8 weeks, possibly more than that. Personally, I've been fielding texts from fishermen who work very hard all the time, not rich men, local community boats, saying, I can't feed my family. I can't feed my kids. What am I going to do? And the stress levels are very, very high. So I would say, that's a massive concern. I think there's been support for businesses. There's obviously been the business grant, which was originally £3,000 up to £10,000, which is really wonderful if you have a rateable property. If your property and your business place is a boat, you're not included in that.
Yeah.
So that's a massive issue for some of our men. I've had some feedback today as well, but we understand that there's been an agreement that banks will look at mortgages and repayments, etc., and loans from businesses. It's not quite as simple as it's seeming with some banks. It's not a 3-month payment holiday. We had one member who was told today that he would have to have absolutely no money in the bank before they would kind of look at a payment holiday on his mortgages and his business loans. Wow. But they were quite happy to sell him a loan.
Wow.
So that's a very worrying situation. It's not quite as it appears.
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses come the end of this crisis are going to find that people remember how they acted, and I think banks and whatnot saying things like that are going to find that a lot of people remember and don't remember fondly. Anyway.
Oh yes.
Moving on. Economy Secretary Fiona Hislop and STUC General Secretary Graham Smith have issued a joint statement outlining the shared commitment to fair work practices in Scotland. The statement calls on employers, trade unions and workers to work together to reach the right decisions on all workplace issues that arise throughout the coronavirus outbreak and ensure that workers are treated fairly. Economy Secretary Fiona Hislop said, "Partnership with workers and trade unions is crucial to making the right decisions to protect workers and ensure public safety while also helping businesses to stay open and keep people in employment. Employers must allow their staff to follow medical advice to self-isolate or isolate with their households. Workers should never feel pressured to breach that advice. Fundamentally, employers should look to maintain jobs and pay their workers throughout this crisis and to make use of government support to achieve this. Scotland's success as an economy is built on a shared endeavour between workers, unions and employers, and this approach will help us get through the outbreak. It is now more important than ever that Scotland adopts fair work principles and practice to get through the COVID-19 health and economic crises and support businesses and their staff to get through this together with cooperation. Many companies are doing this and I thank them for it." And we have heard some really good stories from businesses, some businesses that I think, again, should be remembered after the crisis is over. But we've heard several businesses just behaving appallingly, telling people that even if they felt sick, they had to get to work. Deirdre, what do you think of this? And is there something that the government can do to kind of push businesses to act in a better way?
Well, I mean, I thought that was a really important statement, actually, and terrific to see the STUC and the Scottish Government coming together like that and agreeing that approach. I think the Fair Work principles that the Scottish Government has been supporting for a long time now, and the STUC are in agreement with that as well, is actually a really important distinction for Scotland. I'm really pleased that we have that. But in terms of folk who are not, basically, if it comes down to whether you're looking after your workers or not, and whether you have a care for your workers' health or not, whether the work you are doing is truly classified as essential, or as has been certainly the case in a number of constituents who've been in touch with me, they're being forced by their bosses to go into work, and the threat obviously is there of them losing support altogether. And it's highly distressing for people. And I think perhaps a little more clarity from the UK government at press conferences about what constitutes essential work is allowing some workers, is allowing some bosses to sort of, if you like, play on the ambiguity and then sort of insist on their workers coming in. And I know this is an issue that across the board I am hearing from my colleagues in the Westminster Group, certainly, and I'm sure MSPs are hearing this as well. So in terms of what can be done, I mean, the statement that was issued has only come out, I think, today. So I think that's an important landmark, and I think it offers some guidance to bosses, and it also provides something towards which the workers can point when they feel that they are being unfairly pressured by employers to make them work. And basically, I would urge all employers to follow that guidance. I think you need to treat your people properly, treat your workers well, and let's look towards building a better society as a result of that. I mean, it's something that we should be looking to do at all times anyway, but particularly crucial at this time.
Yeah, I heard saw one person on social media today saying that they'd got a call from somebody about an accident that wasn't their fault, and they were asking if that really was essential work that still needed to be happening right now. But anyway, moving on.
Yeah, well, indeed, call centres is one of the ones, that just in terms of maintaining social distancing. I mean, our employers, is that crucial work? I can't see that myself.
No.
So.
Anyway, at Westminster again, the SNP has renewed calls for the UK government to strengthen welfare protections after the Work and Pension Secretary ruled out implementing immediate grants instead of advance hardship loans, despite 500,000 people applying for universal credit in the last 9 days. In this morning's Work and Pensions Committee, Therese Coffey claimed that it would not be operationally feasible to make advance loans into non-repayable grants to reduce the 5-week wait, and denied that the 70,000 people of 273,000 universal credit applications who applied for an advance payment last week were now in debt to the Department of Work and Pensions. SNP Work and Pensions Committee member Chris Stevens MP has said that if universal credit, which was designed to be agile, is not adapted to support people affected by the current pandemic, then thousands more could be plunged into debt at the hands of the DWP. The SNP has consistently called for the UK government to strengthen welfare protections in response to the crisis. In a letter to Rishi Sunak on Saturday, SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford urged the UK government to increase child benefit and make universal credit more flexible, proposing a package of practical measures. And again, Deirdre, this is something that we've talked about a good deal on the show. It's something that the SNP have been talking about a lot. This crisis in universal credit especially has become enormous. What can be done to solve it?
Well, I mean, I think Chris's suggestions and those that we've been arguing for a long time from the SNP are absolutely right. How they can force people to wait 5 weeks still for universal credit to kick in is just unbelievable to me. I am... we have been arguing that for a very long time, even before this period, because we have all, as MPs, heard from our constituents about the debt that they are being plunged into as a result of that 5-week wait. I struggle to understand, frankly, the mindset of the UK government and indeed the minister in turning around to people who are desperate and saying that you are still going to have to wait, despite current circumstances. And like I say, I can't begin to fathom it. I know the Scottish Government's trying to do as much as it can. It's put extra money into crisis funds, and that people, I think they've doubled the amount that we would normally put into those funds. And those are available around Scotland, and trying to do as much as we can. But unfortunately, so much of the welfare and benefit system is still devolved to the UK government that we still have to wait for the UK government to sort of act. And this is the frustration sometimes, because I feel there is so much more we could be doing for my constituents, for all of our constituents, and yet, our hands are tied because we are still tied into the Westminster welfare and benefit system.
Yeah. And Elaine, you mentioned that some of your members have been kind of directed towards the benefit system, towards claiming for universal credit. How are they coping with the problems that we all know are associated with universal credit?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're being told it's going to be a longer wait than 5 weeks, and if you have a family of 4 to feed, it's very concerning. It's obviously very concerning, and I think as well, on top of that, a lot of us will know that some people with disabilities had their support reviewed before this happened. I worry about them too, because what's going to happen to their appeals, etc. in this period? Some people have lost a lot of funds and are particularly vulnerable at this time. If they're disabled, etc. or have ill health. So yes, I mean, I'm very concerned. I think nobody can be expected to wait 5 weeks to be in a position to try and feed a family, and particularly if they've had a lot of financial commitments previously. And everyone can debate whether £94 or £73 is enough to keep people a week anyway. But I think if you have a lot of financial commitments because you weren't expecting this, then it's a big concern.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge issue. And Deirdre, I saw Edward Lee, of all people, today talking about universal basic income as a solution to some of these issues. What do you think this is something that the SNP has called for? We've had Ronnie Cowan on the show several times talking about it. He's a big fan. What do you think the chances are of something like that moving forward in the UK?
I am kind of staggered that it hasn't happened already. Again, we can look to other countries that have introduced this, almost as soon as things started hitting the sort of crisis levels that they're at the moment. This was introduced, and I just feel Ian raised this with the Prime Minister last week at Prime Minister's Questions, Ian Blackford. We got the sort of waffled response, but I think now is the time. It has to be introduced. That's a personal view, but it's also, of course, the view of the party. We shouldn't be mucking around anymore. We cannot be faffing around when people are in desperate need, and that, I'm afraid, is what I feel that in some ways the UK government is guilty of. I think there's far too much of that, and we need to act now. I want to see I want to see that basic income introduced, and I want to see it introduced as quickly as possible. I think it's absolutely vital.
Yeah. Well, moving on now. And Prince Charles has tested positive for coronavirus and is self-isolating at his holiday home on his mother's estate in Scotland, Clarence House has said. Charles, aged 71, is said to be up and about and in good spirits and has continued to work for the last few days. Doctors believe the earliest he would have been contagious was on the 13th of March. He apparently last saw the Queen on the 12th of March following an investiture. His last public engagement was also on the 12th of March. He has, however, held private meetings since then. He's now self-isolating at his holiday home in Birk Hall, as his wife, Camilla, is self-isolating separately from Charles, also at Birk Hall, and will do so for 14 days. She apparently also was tested, but has tested negative. And Deirdre, I'm not quite sure how to ask a question about this. What do you think of the fact that Charles apparently bypassed the strict clinical criteria that we all heard were in place in order to get tested? And you will answer that one first.
I'm still struggling to understand it. There seems to be a growing clamour of questions on social media about this, because people have locked onto the fact that he does appear to have been tested, although whether he was symptomatic or not. I mean, there are questions as to whether he had symptoms. I mean, the royal journalist for the BBC, I think, had suggested that he was showing mild symptoms before he travelled up to the Highlands. Mm-hmm. It's pretty surprising that the heir to the throne would not take notice of the advice that had been, I mean, it was everywhere, as you know, not to travel up to the Highlands or remote parts of Scotland. And whether they had the symptoms or not, so as not to spread the virus. But, there he was getting on a plane in London with his symptoms and his entourage and heading to Aberdeenshire to get tested. I think, I have to say, in those circumstances, I find that quite irresponsible, and I'm really quite shocked that anyone would do that, but particularly the sort of disregard for the welfare of the people travelling with him, but also of the people who will have to attend on him in his retreat is kind of, shocking, really. I think I'd have to say. Yeah,
and Elaine, what's your feeling on this? Do you think the Prince has a right as a royal to go wherever he wants within his realm? Or do you think this, getting a private RAF jet to take him away from all the filth and disease of the south of England, and bring it up here with 6 of his staff apparently infected as well? What do you make of this story?
All I can say is what we advise our members to do is follow the government's advice. And I can say that we've had a lot of members in touch, particularly in the West Highlands, obviously talking about an entourage of people going there. And I think everybody will have seen a lot of the Highlands and Islands, or a lot of the islands specifically, saying, do we have the facilities to cope with what might happen if you bring it with you? I think I saw a tweet from Barra. So of course we have to be mindful about those communities and the facilities that they have actually to support the people if they do get sick. And it's something I think we all have to keep in our minds.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I have to say, Kenny, I am struggling to understand why that trip was planned, why they decided to head there. Is this the usual time for royals to head to? It's Balmoral, is it?
It's on the Balmoral estate. It's his own house.
I mean, is that normally when they? I mean, I'm just trying to see. I mean, there were questions being asked about other royals and where they were in the UK and whether they were all, at different properties around the UK. Or, I mean, there are questions to be answered here. So I'm sure that our journalists will be pursuing that.
Well, we can only hope that they will. I don't think that Nicholas Witchell, for example, will be pursuing it too hard. But anyway, moving on now to non-coronavirus news. And Turkish prosecutors have formally charged 20 Saudi nationals over the murder of the dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the kingdom's consulate in Istanbul in 2018, including 2 men close to the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. The former royal court advisor, Saud al-Qahtani, and former deputy head of intelligence, Ahmed al-Asiri, were among the suspects charged with instigating a premeditated murder with the intent of causing torment through fiendish instinct, the office of the Istanbul chief prosecutor, Irfan Fidan, said today. Assisted by 3 intelligence officers, a team of 15 men then travelled to Istanbul and carried out Qahtani and Asiri's orders, the statement has said. The gruesome killing stunned Saudi Arabia's Western allies, plunging the kingdom into its worst diplomatic crisis since the 9/11 attacks. It also irreversibly tarnished Prince Mohammed's image as a liberal reformer after questions were raised over how such an operation could have been carried out without his consent or knowledge. The CIA, along with several Western governments, eventually concluded that the Crown Prince had ordered Khashoggi's assassination. The kingdom has denied such claims, instead blaming rogue agents who it says took a repatriation mission too far. Arrest warrants for the suspects have already been issued, but since none are in the country, a trial in absentia will be opened at an unspecified date, the prosecutor has said. Turkey is seeking life imprisonment in all 20 cases. And Deirdre, this is, I mean, it's a terrible case, but this has got to be good news that we're seeing these men at least theoretically brought to justice. Yes,
I mean, that certainly is good news. I mean, you mentioned this, Kenny. I haven't actually caught up with this, frankly. We've just got so many folk calling in about the coronavirus and the impact on their lives that I haven't really had time to catch up with it. But I remember reading a story, I think it was in the New York Times, and it was just talking about, it was Mr. Khashoggi's fiancée, and how she had waited outside the embassy for hours before realising eventually that he wasn't going to come out again. And it was just heartrending. And I am delighted that people appear to be finally being brought to justice here. I think, what are they saying? They're saying that these are rogue agents and it was a repatriation incident, was it?
Yeah, that's what the Saudis are claiming. But they've claimed a lot of different things over this.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's hope that, these people do finally get brought to justice. It was one of those things, I think, that really brought the world together in a sort of sense of outrage and disgust. It was just such a horrendous thing to happen, and to such a liberal, talented man. It was, So, it is certainly good news that that's happening.
Yeah. And just moving on to our final story now, Ian Blackford has said the health and care workers responding to the coronavirus emergency are heroes and must be honoured by Parliament after the crisis. Speaking at Prime Minister's questions, the SNP Westminster leader praised the thousands of former NHS staff seeking to return to work and all those working tirelessly to tackle the coronavirus. Ian Blackford said, when this crisis is over, Parliament must find a way to honour the amazing heroes in our NHS and care sector who are working tirelessly to help us defeat coronavirus. From consultants to cleaners, carers to nurses, drivers to maintenance workers, GPs to paramedics, many thousands of people are performing vital work to save the lives of others, and this must be recognised. And Elaine, I think we would probably all agree with this. It's been phenomenal to see how many people are really pushing through a lot of difficulties to keep things working.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't agree with that anymore. From personal circumstances, I have a disabled son, adult son. I've forgone obviously all his caring responsibilities because there are people who have nobody, and carers are under such a lot of pressure at the moment, as are medics, etc. So we cannot take our hats off to these people enough. Without them, how would we get by? And I think it's not any more acutely than now in terms of how we are realising that.
Yeah, and Deirdre, this kind of brings up the whole question of that we discussed a wee bit earlier of what is an essential worker. I mean, we've got people cleaning hospitals who are perhaps the most important people in the whole system right now. We've got people working in supermarkets who are, taking huge risks, really, as people come in and out of the shops. What's your feeling on all of this? The workers who are keeping us going.
Delivering our food, and getting our food up into the supermarkets, but also, increasing amounts of sort of door-to-door deliveries for some of our more vulnerable people. Let's not forget the folk who are at home under this sort of shielding principle, where they've been advised to stay in their homes for 3 months. So just trying to get all those folk who are helping out with the logistics of trying to make that possible. I mean, I know we had a conference call with Edinburgh City Council officials and Edinburgh Council's leader, Adam McVeigh, the other day, all the MPs and MSPs. And it was heartening to see just how much work they are doing, how much work they're aware needs to be done, with the extra funding that's coming in from the Scottish Government, which has been, clearly incredibly helpful. But, just we are so grateful to all of these people who are helping keep things going like this. I'm not sure how. What Ian had in mind in terms of these folk, but I've, just I mean, firstly, let's look at who are the important. I mean, a few people have said this. Who are the folk who are really important in our society? And, now we're at a time when we're seeing that the really important people are the folk in our hospitals, our teachers, our care workers, our unpaid carers. There are our folk delivering our food, preparing our food, producing our food. These are the really important people, and yet we do not value them enough in terms of the pay that they get. And this is something I think, once we're through this, because I believe we are going to get through this. Once we are, there has to be a total reconsideration of these people and their value in our society. And we need to renegotiate, rejig, relook at this. It's really important. And at some stage, I'd love to see some sort of recognition for these people for all their efforts. Maybe an Order of Scotland or something like that, because they're heroes. They're all heroes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is all we've got time for tonight, though. So I'd like to thank Deirdre and Elaine for joining us. It's not always the easiest thing to do technically, to have both of you coming in on Skype at once.
I wish I could see you, but
but we'd like to thank both of you very much for being here. And we'd also like to thank you at home for joining us. As always, the show is worth nothing if we don't have viewers. So you're the most important people in all of this. If you're able to support us, we know times are tough just now, and if you don't have the resources to support us, then please don't feel you have to. But we have seen a number of new people joining us as supporters this week. Sometimes when times are tough, we see people becoming more generous. That's one of the things we're talking about there. So if you are able to support us financially, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, sign up as a supporter, and your £5 a month can make a big difference to us here, just keeping the lights on and then producing more programs for you. That's one of the things we're talking about a lot right now, is how we can give people who are stuck at home something interesting to get their teeth into. If you're not able to support us financially, please don't feel bad about that. We understand that times are tough. We understand that even at the best of times, there are plenty of you who can't afford to support us. But you can still help us by following us on Twitter at BroadcastScot, by finding us on Facebook, and by sharing the show with your friends, your family. As I say, when people are stuck at home, they're always looking for something else to watch. So let them know that Broadcasting Scotland is providing a different perspective than they might get from the BBC or ITV. That's what we're here for. That's what we're aiming to do, and we have some of the best guests you'll find anywhere. So also, if you want to get involved, we always need help here, whether that's as a journalist, whether it's appearing on screen, or if you know somebody if you are somebody who could be a guest, then that's also something you can get in touch with us about. We're always all ears for anybody that's got any skills to offer. But again, thank you to Deirdre, thank you to Elaine. Gordon will be back tomorrow at 7 with another episode, and until then, I've been Kenny McBride. Have a great night.
Thank you.